Hello everyone. I just found this nice hand played by LLinusLLove, and I thought why not take you guys along on this ride and go through the hand, then head to the solver and see how everything plays out in GTO Wizard, and just taking you along through the process of how I run the simulation and how I look for cues and what to take away from this hand and anything else that comes along when we go through it. So let's just have a look at what happens. Linus has pocket fives here. Kevin raises from the cutoff, 2.5x. Linus calls, pretty standard. He flops a set, always nice. They are 200 big blinds deep, a little bit more even. So that's maybe why this sizing is a little bit bigger than just a 1/3 bet. However, still this board is probably not one where 1/3 is the standard sizing. You could go higher here, pretty sure. He goes for 50%, and then you would think that this is a very nice board to check raise, right? Wrong. Well, we will see if it's wrong in a minute. But Linus goes ahead and just check calls here. So this is probably a spot already where most people will just go ahead and check raise here, myself included, very likely because you have such a nice board where you have a lot of bluffs that you have in your range that could check raise here. You also get a lot of value when you check raise and your opponent has top pair, a lot of overpairs that are in their range, flush draws, whatever. So this is just a very nice board to check raise on, actually. So this check call is rather surprising to me, but let's get it going. The 9 comes on the turn, and here Linus checks again, and Kevin goes for the overbet, which is not too surprising on this structure here. When the big blind check calls on the flop, they have a very wide range pre-flop already, so they could have any pair here, any gut shot, any ace-x hand, ace-jack, for example, king-queen, king-jack, queen-jack, maybe even when they have some backdoor flush draws. So when Kevin has a lot of overpairs in this range, still that Linus does not have, he pretty much has a big advantage, and going polarized on this turn is the preferred choice. And when that is the case, you usually want to overbet to get max value from your good hands against a medium range that the big blind is playing here. However, in this spot, Linus is actually not setting on a medium hand, but he has pretty much, yeah, it is the third nuts, of course, but it is a nut hand. So when they are this deep, you could expect him to check raise here, which is what he does. And maybe that was his thought all along, that when he check calls the flop, a lot of turn cards will be some that Kevin might be barreling for an overbet. So almost anything that is, let's say, a 7 or higher and not a club on the turn is probably a good card for Kevin to overbet. Maybe not an ace X or an ace on the turn might not be the best card to overbet, but go for 75% maybe on the turn. Not too sure about that, but anything else is probably a very good card to overbet on. And if Linus expects that, he could just go and check raise not the flop but the turn, as he can do on this one here. Because this deep, you have a good chance of getting a lot of money in either way, so you don't have to necessarily check raise the flop already and then barrel it off yourself. But if you expect an overbet on the turn, you still can get all the money in that way, which is of course what we want when we have a set. And he does that. Here, I guess anything that is an overpair already starts to be quite, yeah, quite difficult of a call. Not in practice maybe, so especially on low stakes, I would expect most people to call those a lot, if not always, so jacks plus to be specific. However, I think that in the solver, those would probably already start mixing in some folds. Probably jack or pocket jacks, pocket queens a little bit more than aces or kings, just because queen jack, maybe jack 10 with some backdoors could check call the flop and then check raise the turn. So with queens and jacks, you block a little bit more bluffs. But that's just my estimation. 10x is probably a better call even than pocket jacks, just because you block 10-9, maybe a slow play 10-5 suited that Linus check called on the flop, and now check raises on the turn. In any case, Kevin calls. The river is an ace, and here, when you check raise the flop, you of course could go either way. You could go just checking and hope your opponent bluffs it off with a missed draw, like queen jack themselves, any kind of flush draw, maybe even a hand like king jack peels us off on the turn, or that they value bet. So I don't know if ace king, like ace king of clubs, ace queen of clubs, would go ahead and bet here. On mid stakes, I would definitely bet against that. On these stakes, I'm not sure. But if you are not sure about that, then jamming is probably a preferred play, right? Just because you block so few of your opponent's calls in like a 10x and ace x, two pair like ace 9, ace 10, those will call anyway, and you don't block those with pocket fives. If we had like pocket tens here, or a hand like ace 10, you would probably be more inclined to just check, because you block less of your opponent's calls, or you block more of your opponent's calls, I'm sorry. So pocket fives, what I would expect mostly is a jam here. In practice and in the solver as well. However, Linus checks again here, or not again, he again goes for the more passive play, and he checks. And Kevin goes ahead and jams here. Linus then calls. I don't want to spoiler it though, so I will not click on the next action. We will go into that later, but for now, let's go into the solve a little bit with an open mind and not kind of a bias, right? So let's go ahead and start the sim. We are here in GTO Wizard. We're gonna go and click on the 200 blinds. Also, I like to go with the simple option here. In this case, it doesn't really matter, because the cutoff will just open or fold anyway. But if you have like a small blind 3-betting range in the simple approach, they would just 3-bet or fold here. In the GTO approach, or general approach it's called, they would also have a calling range, which for some players makes sense. Like Linus, I think he has a calling range here in the small blind, but if you play yourself on low stakes, most people don't have that. So the simple approach is a little bit more accurate for those stakes. Now, cutoff raises, pretty much self-explanatory, 32%. So let's have a look. Yeah, chip EV is the case here, so this is rake free. And anything else here, pretty much everything looks great. So then we have the big blinds calling range. Yeah, 53% of folds. Everything else can 3-bet or call, which pocket fives will do, as we can see here. And now let's go into the post-flop strategy. So here we will just move this over to the side, go to the flop, and we see that Kevin went for the 50% sizing on the flop. And what you can do is you can always choose whether you want to have the sizes be automatic or fixed. So what I like to do when I do some analysis for the YouTube videos, for example, I just put in some various sizes and include the one that they actually used, of course, 75, and then an overbet. For the big blind, as they don't play here or they don't bet, we can just leave it at automatic. And if you want to know what the best single bet size is for the cutoff here, you can also just click the automatic one. However, we want to use the one that Kevin actually used in game to go off of that. Then for the turn, we will also use the automatic one for, oh no, we have to adjust the check raising range. So we will do that in a second. The barreling range here for imposition, I think he used a 150. Yep. So let's change that to 150. The rest we can leave it the same. And Linus raised for a little bit less than 4x, and we can actually do the math here. 650 by 1650. That would be 3.66. So for the raise size, we can use that, then go for the X. Bet size, yeah, donk bet size, probably a small one, if at all, but I don't think any donk betting is going on here. And then for the river, we will see what happens. Oh yeah, he check raises. Yeah, on the river, he will probably just have mainly a jam here, maybe some block bets. We can use these, but we could also just add a 10% just to see if that is an option as well. And for imposition, yeah, he jammed in this hand. If you want to know if you could use other sizes as well, we could, of course, also include some tiny sizes here, even though I don't think those are used, but you never know what you don't know. So if you want to go make sure, then just go ahead and insert all of these sizes and we will see what comes out of it. To make sure we have the bet sizes, the stack sizes right, 550 is okay, 5.5 big blinds, and then Linus's stack is the reference here with 214 big blinds. Now we can click create, choose the board. And here we are. So for the big blind, the one donk bet sizing would be 40% here. However, it's never used, so not sure how much that is worth. Not too important to consider. And it appears that I was wrong actually, so 1/3 is actually the most used size for the solver here. 50% is also used quite a lot, and anything bigger than that is basically never used. So in this case, what I would do is just trim this tree already. So if we see that that Kevin used a 50% sizing, then I would just get rid of the 1/3 size and just assume he only uses 50%. Of course, we don't know that if he only uses 50% on this board or this flop. Maybe he mixes sizes as well, but it's just easier to go from there and assume he only uses one bet size because all hands are now in this betting range. Because if he uses multiple bet sizes, we don't know which hands are in the smaller ones and which ones are in the bigger ones. So just keeping it as simple as possible will be the best approach. And against that bet, we can actually see that pocket fives is not always a raise. 80% of the time for these two combos, and then even more calls are happening for this combo. Yeah, this combo doesn't have a spade, so probably that takes away a little bit of EV when the board runs out with 2 spades on the turn and on a river, because you block less flushes. I would just think that that's the reason for a little bit of a more passive play with this combo. He does have 1 spade, and that's this combo, but still 20% of calls is actually part of the equilibrium strategy. So this is probably never a big mistake. All right, so we could go through all of these hands right now, but let's just keep it a little bit more simple. We can see that a lot of hands that would check raise come from this lower part of the range here. So straight draws, open enders, gut shots like 6-4. Of course, a lot of them have flush draws as well, or backdoor flush draws. But oh no, actually, what am I talking about? This one, the flush draw combo does actually check call here, and the backdoor flush draw combo is the one that check raises more often, which is something you see a lot because this flush draw combo probably doesn't like to check to put in as much money here when it will be dominated a lot against higher flushes or flush draws. And instead it can often just go for a check call and then also check call or even check raise on the turn. And also if we face a 3-bet with a combo like this, we are kind of in a dicey spot. We probably want to call, we don't want to fold right away, but there is not too much good happening if we have to call a 3-bet. Because either we miss and then we have to check fold on the turn, or we get there and then we're up against a higher flush draw a lot of the time as well. Whereas if we check raise a combo like this one, which is a backdoor flush draw, if we face a 3-bet, we have a pretty easy fold, and we don't lose out on that much EV that we cannot realize. A lot of other check raises are deuce X here, so blocking the pocket deuces in Kevin's range and also having quite a lot of equity with 2-pair and trip outs, but also backdoor equity in terms of straight draws. Oh, this is 2-pair. Let's hover over this combo. Backdoor straight draws, but also again, the backdoor flush draw combo is check raised a lot of the time and much more often than the other ones. So when we see a call and head to the turn, which was the 9 of diamonds, we again see no donk bets. And for the big blind, we see that an overbet is used a lot, but even more often we would choose a normal big bet size here. So, or the solver would at least. Which is interesting because I would think that 100 big blinds deep, this would be used much less often, probably because any overpair 100 big blinds deep can just go for stacks on a normal run out, whereas 200 big blinds, that probably isn't the case. And this is something that if you're curious, you can just go ahead and have a look. So if we change this tree to the 79 big blinds that we would have if we played full stacks, and then go through that same line. First of all, we will see, oh no, 1 second. Yeah, so pocket fives would actually check call a little bit more often here, just because it's probably easier to get the money in 100 big blinds deep anyway without check raising. However, if we want to be precise, we have to trim the tree to 50% only on the flop as well. Yeah, and then it's almost the same, so not a big difference here to the 200 big blinds. And here, yeah, this is actually the case that 150 is used more often than 200 big blinds deep, and even more often than the 75% bet size. But still, 75% is used very often as well, so almost as often as 150. Yeah, so good takeaway to have here. We can leave the 100 big blind solution open here if we want to compare anything else in the future. Always good to get some context. If we only get this one simulation here, we only have one snapshot of everything, and it makes sense to put it into perspective, see what changes if some of the circumstances change, and that way you will always get a little bit more insight on which parameters matter here and which do not matter as much. So which hands would bet here 150? Let's see. Mostly over pairs. We can actually go this way. This is more easy. This is easier. So top pairs mostly like to go for the 75% bet size, simply because if you have 10x yourself, you will get less value from your opponent. So betting bigger makes it harder to get value and makes it easier for your opponent to fold a lot of hands that are worse than top pair, just because you get less odds or worse odds. And therefore, this bet size makes more sense for top pairs. With the overpair region, we already see that these use the overbet much more often, and pretty much all of them use them similarly often. Kings bet a little bit more often for the overbet than the other combos, but there's not too much of a difference between all of the other ones. And then two pair use it even a little bit more often, and sets do as well. So not too much of a rocket science. The better your hand, the bigger you can bet it. Even the solver agrees to that, just because you get more value and you have a better chance of getting all the money in over 3 streets. All right, so here we could simplify it to only 150, but I think this is a spot where it's maybe a little bit more likely that a player chooses to split its bets, so use the 75% and the 150, just because, as we saw, the top pair region really doesn't like to overbet here. So the incentive for different hand classes to use different bet sizes is a little bit higher than on the flop, where pretty much any hand can bet any sizing if the frequencies are right. But in practice, I guess this would be a spot where many players would use different bet sizes more often. So let's just leave it like that. Against the 150, we now see that pocket fives always want to raise. And if we use this raise size that Linus used, then it would actually use this one in 100% of the time. So theoretically, you could also just jam here, but that is not solver approved, as we can see. Other hands that would check raise here are mainly sets, so almost all of them would check raise here. Interesting to see that 10s would check raise more often than pocket 9s, which I would have thought would be the other way around, because if you have pocket 9s, your opponent can have more 10x and check call the raise more often, whereas if you have pocket 10s, your opponent can have more 9x, but are they gonna call 9x as often as they would 10x? Maybe. Let's have a look. Yeah, actually. So second pairs call 100% of the time here, and top pairs don't. Mainly because ace 10 off wants to always fold here. And I can only guess why that is the case. I would think that is because some bluffs in the big blinds range might be ace-x. No, No, that's not the case at all. So why does ace 10 always want to fold? Okay, well, because it's the only hand that is 10x and not a flush draw. Because these suited hands, or it's the only hand, the only 10x that would go for the overbet and then not be a flush draw. So that makes sense. Anything else that is 10x has a flush draw here. And let's see which 10x would, which 9x would just bet and then call also. All right, yeah, maybe because 9x always only bets this size when it's a flush draw. So none of them ever fold against the check raise, whereas 10x also bets when they don't have a flush draw, as in ace 10 off, but then they sometimes fold. So which that makes 10x a better check raise because 9x will always call and 9s will be a worse check raise because 10x will sometimes fold. Yeah, sometimes it's, I think that makes sense. But these are the things that solvers are pretty good for. And then you have to make the next step and transfer that into real life, whether it is actually the case that your opponent c-bets 150 with all these 10x that are not flush draws and then always call it, whether they actually c-bet all of those 9x with a flush draw, or do they just check them? And that, if that is the case, then these correlations look completely different. But it's cool to get the dynamics, know how the solver thinks or how it works and where it draws its conclusions, so to say. It just calculates EV, I know, but if the solver was a human, then we would say it would draw conclusions. Well, anyway, pocket fives always check raise because they block so little of the continuing range. And let's have a look once more. Oh yeah, and actually those overpairs start to fold, and it's actually pretty close to what I said, that jacks sometimes fold. Queens are actually the most folded. I would have thought that jacks fold more often, but still the principle is pretty much the same. And kings always also start to fold here, whereas aces always continue. So that makes sense. We also see some queen jack continue here, king queen only when it is when it has a flush draw, king jack as well. Yeah, we already mentioned those 10x hands. So top pair only with a flush draw, second pair only with a flush draw, over pairs only kings and aces always, and then the other ones mixed. Two pair always, sets always, ace high with a flush draw, king high probably also only with a flush draw, and then open enders pretty much always. No, not always. Queen jack suited almost always. Queen jack off not almost always. Not always. Probably because here, oh yeah, here we can see that the club combos really don't like to continue because they block bluffs, and the ones without a club actually like to continue more often. And jack 8 is actually continuing every time. I wonder why jack 8 is a better continue than queen jack. And I wonder if I should go into that right now or not. Maybe next time. If you want to know that, then let me know. But let's continue on with the hand. This is getting long already. So Kevin calls. River is an ace of spades, I'm pretty sure. Yep. And here we see that for Linus, pocket fives pretty much always bets. It's a 5% checking frequency, and the solver does implement a blocking range here, a blocking strategy. which makes sense a lot of the time if the bet size is so big, so over the pot. It makes sense to implement a block betting strategy with some of the little bit thinner value bets. Like I would say 9-5 is a thin bet here, just because it beats a lot of hands in the cutoffs range and also the cutoffs calling range. But if we jam here, I guess the times we would get called by a better hand are pretty high. Right, so do I have a filter on? Pocket fives almost always bet, but checking is also part of the strategy. So it's again, it's not like he's making like a huge mistake here. He's just punting it off by checking. But still, this is a pretty clear all-in, and if you look at the simulation, you would take away that pocket fives would just mostly jam here. However, let's have a look at what happens against the jam for Kevin and what would happen when he checks. So against the jam, he would need to call 40% of hands, and the worst hands would be some underpairs. So pocket jacks here, pocket queens some little time, and even pocket kings sometimes, which is probably, I don't know about Kevin yet now specifically yet. But most players, I would assume, will not call these almost ever, except if they really think you're a spewtard. So that's one argument for maybe expecting him to overfold against the jam, which makes jamming pocket fives a little bit worse. Top pairs, he in this case would have very few, because they wouldn't take, so ace king to be specific wouldn't take this line that often apparently. Not sure if it's the overbet on the turn, probably. Yeah, it almost never uses the overbet on the turn, so that's why it's not in the range as often here. And then only ace 3, ace 4 would be here, and of those only ace 3 would sometimes call. What happens in practice is debatable, of course. Maybe if Linus thinks he always folds those, then again jabbing pocket fives is not as good as checking it. Two pair would basically always call, and that's a fair point, because if you have two pair, you block so many of your opponent's value hands as well. So 9-10 is specifically blocks pocket 10s and pocket 9s, which are using this line so often, especially pocket 9s. Pocket 9s is probably the most likely value hand to for the big blind to have, because 9s just check call pretty much every time on the flop, whereas deuces, 5s, and even pocket 10s sometimes check raise the flop at least. So if you have 10-9, it's probably a pretty good hand to call with. And then sets sometimes even fold, so pocket deuces here. That really shows the blocker effect. So pocket deuces, a set, is pretty much one of the best hands you can have here, of course. You can have higher sets, of course, but still it's being called less often than 10-9, which just blocks more sets, and pocket deuces doesn't block any sets. So if you have pocket deuces, you're just hoping that your opponent value bets two pair for in this line, which is difficult, right? Especially if we implement a small bet size here on the river, which a lot of two pair will go into. So yeah, in practice, probably all sets always call, but it's not impossible for for Kevin to overfold here, especially if we look at the top pairs and the under pairs, which would sometimes have to call in practice. King 10 as well, but again, maybe King 10 is being called more often than Ace-X, just because 10x blocks at least some of the big blind's sets, which Ace-X doesn't really. And then let's have a look at what Kevin would have to do against the check. So here, as we saw, he would, in theory, maybe that's not the case in practice, but maybe it is, he would have Queen Jack here on the turn when he calls a raise, and he would mostly just bluff those. So only the club combos would check behind, which makes sense intuitively because you block your opponent's folds. And the same goes for Jack 8, just that even Jack 8 of clubs would sometimes bet here. So that's it for the bluffs. And then you have some other random club combos here, which sometimes take this line. Might be more, might be less in practice. King high never bluffs. Those are also clubs. That makes sense. And then for the value betting range, you have your 2 pair, which actually go for a small sizing sometimes as well on the river. 10-9, Ace-10. And then sets as well. But even those, even pocket 5s sometimes just go ahead and check behind. So if Kevin bets those always, which is not too unlikely, right? Because if you have pocket 5s here on the river in this line, do you really expect to be behind that much? Or do you expect Linus to have like an Ace-3, Ace-4 himself and just hero call you a lot of the time? Or like a 10-9? I think in practice having pocket 5s and pocket deuces, you are pretty confident that you're gonna win this hand, even if you shove and your opponent calls. Just because slow playing sets is also pretty unlikely, I would say, in practice. So given that, I could see why Linus went for the check. He might think that that Kevin just bets more often than the solver, and maybe even folds more often against the jam than the solver. And now let's finally have a look at what happens here in this hand. So we already saw that Linus checked, Kevin jammed, Linus calls, and Kevin had Ace-10, which is not too specular here. It's pretty normal, I would say. But yeah, let's have a look at if, yeah, Ace-10. Ace-10 off, actually, we saw that it would be a pure fold on the turn. So after check raising the turn, Ace-10 is actually always folding here in theory, which is another good point for why check raising the turn would make sense, right? Might be a little bit harder for Linus to get value from Ace-10 when he check raises the flop, then the turn, barrels the turn, and then bets the river. I'm not sure. Well, if the river is not an ace, which he can't know for before, of course. So if he thinks Kevin might over bet, so bet more often on the turn, and then also over call against the raise, as he evidently did, then maybe going for this line, it makes more sense as well. All of that is just speculation, of course, but I think this was an interesting hand, and it's always fun to see what the solver says. But that's it for today. Let me know what you think of it. If you have any thoughts on the hand, on the way we went through this simulation, or anything else on your mind, just let me know. Or otherwise, I'll see you in the next time.